Hello, and welcome to Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And each week we invite you to send in your questions and we'll explore the stories of the city of Mississauga together. Please subscribe and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. For this week's episode, we have a special focus on the 20th anniversary of a beloved program here at Heritage Mississauga, Haunted Mississauga. Haunted Mississauga in its 20th year, or looking back at the event over its many years, it has grown to become a beloved and greatly followed event here in the city of Mississauga. The event itself usually takes place one evening per year, typically in late October. It began back in 2002 and it has evolved over the years to include guided tours of historic sites and cemeteries with a talented volunteer cast of actors portraying people and events from our city's past. Over the years, Haunted Mississauga has traveled to a different site every year with a different story, and it has evolved into just a beloved program, not only for the audience, but also for the actors who have become very much connected to this event over the years. Since the event began, we've had an 1836 election in the Streetsville Memorial Cemetery. We've hunted for the rebel William Lyon Mackenzie in Spring Creek Cemetery. We've had a First World War victory party at Benares Historic House. We've searched for an 1812 trader at Dixie Union Cemetery. We've met the Stonehookers of Port Credit. We've celebrated Confederation and Trinity Anglican Cemetery, and a 1920s garden party at Riverwood, just to name a few. And like I said, the event moves around different locations, different stories each and every year. And so much more than just that, regardless of the weather. We always say with Haunted Mississauga, because it's usually an outdoor event, regardless of weather, it runs. And we have had all kinds of weather over the years, between rain and snow and sleet and warm, sunny and t-shirt weather. It's been all over the map. So whether or not Haunted Mississauga does take place. COVID has presented some challenges to the event over the last couple of years, and we've had to take the event from being in person to a virtual program. So for Haunted Mississauga 2021, which is our 20th year of doing the event, it is once again a virtual program, and we will invite you. The event runs tomorrow night, October 29th, and you'll have a chance to explore the stories and some of the people associated with Historic Moors Cemetery up in the Malton area. History truly does come to life with Haunted Mississauga in a fun, interactive, and very much unscripted evening. We're ever so thankful to our volunteer cast and crew, which we refer to as our spirit team, which brings Haunted Mississauga to life each and every year. Their efforts truly do shine a light, albeit often in the dark, on the fascinating stories of Mississauga's past. We would also like to thank the Ontario Trillium Foundation Resilient Communities Fund for their support, which allows us to reimagine programs like Haunted Mississauga to better serve and connect with our community. So again, thank you for joining us with Ask a Historian as we wander down the story of Haunted Mississauga. Thank you. So joining me to further our discussion on all things Haunted Mississauga is Heritage Mississauga's Justine Lyn. Justine is the chief collaborator for this year's event, Haunted Mississauga 2021, our 20th Haunted Mississauga evening. And when you interact or you view the material, and in normal years when you're able to come through the tour, we always like to say that you're getting an education without knowing you're getting one. And the way we do that is the story that we craft for the evening is based on real events. And so our story this year is in 1847, and it's focused on something that happened in this community and the people who lived in the community at the time around that. And so Justine, I'm wondering if you can walk us through kind of the story that is the inspiration for Haunted Mississauga 2021.
Yeah, so I've always been really interested in, the darker side of Mississauga. I find that really interesting. So when I was looking through this this case, it really struck me as quite interesting. So it is about a real trial, real murder that happened in the area. So we're talking about the Crown versus James Hamilton in this case. And so James Hamilton in 1847 was on trial for the murder of Noah Eaton in February of 1847. Hamilton was an acquaintance of Noah Eaton's. He rented land from Eaton. He was more or less the last person to be seen with Eaton alive that the night of the murder. He was involved with a legal dispute with Eaton. He owed Eaton quite a bit of money, and at times when people would give Hamilton money, he would just say, "Oh, just give it to Eaton," because he was so in debt. So obviously he had motive for murdering him, and he did have the opportunity to do so because he had a lengthy discussion with Eaton on the night of the murder, and in the presence of an acquaintance. And after they left, the acquaintance said that basically Hamilton returned to talk with him for 10 minutes, and when he came, his appearance was totally unchanged. Didn't seem like anything was wrong until the next day when Noah Eaton is found murdered.
And there's some story, I know this was kind of, the trial was very early on in terms of these kinds of crimes, 1847, but it was covered in the Globe newspaper. And there's some suggestion that Noah Eaton, the victim, maybe wasn't a well-loved individual in the community. So that there are certainly fingers pointed in other directions as well.
Yeah, there was. And then also too, it's kind of very shocking as well because he was reportedly murdered with his own axe. So at the time, you can imagine for the residents of the area that it must have been very shocking, very horrifying, and just scary because they were thinking, well, we have to catch this axe of murder in our community. And so that's kind of very much the inspiration behind this story, where these people they're scared, they just want to catch whoever did this, and maybe they are not necessarily paying attention to other people who it could be. They just really want to find whoever did this and just say, okay, good, our hands are clean, our community is safe again, good, let's move on. So that's kind of the inspiration or the interpretation right. that I was kind of going with, I guess. So anyway, so this it's full of gossip, different people trying to figure out what happened, murder mystery type thing. So
we are taking a real crime in a real time with people who were in that community alive at that time. And so certainly this was covered again in the national newspaper of the day, the Globe. And, this would have been, even though we don't necessarily have the gossip per se, this certainly would have been known in this community. And again, the community we're looking at, the event is focused on Moores Cemetery, a historic cemetery up on Derry Road near Malton, which is not too far from where the crime itself took place. And the cemetery was in existence at that time. Again, the people that are living or are being depicted in the cemetery were alive at that time. And so, it's based in fact. There's a little bit of theatrical involvement there with actors interpreting people and stories that are crafted to tell the tale, as it were. But again, it is based in the real crime, the trial, and the information that was presented therein. We're not going to give away the end result of the trial, but needless to say, it was covered in the time at the time as national news. And so, right here, this sleepy little crossroads community in historic Mississauga, then Toronto Township, home to a nefarious murder in 1847. So one of the things that we do with Haunted Mississauga, of course, is create profiles, character bios for our volunteer actors to portray. And so part of what I wanted to do was explore some of those with you and kind of tantalize our listeners a little bit to tune in tomorrow night to watch the Haunted Mississauga broadcast. Who are some of the characters that the audience will meet with Haunted Mississauga 2021?
Yeah, so all the characters are people who are actually buried in Moore Cemetery. And so the first person I want to talk about was Mrs. Mary Ann Moore. And the reason I want to talk about her first is because we're in Moore Cemetery. And she's part of the family who that cemetery is named after. So she was born Mary Ann Judson in 1807 in Yorkshire, England, and she immigrated to Toronto Township and ended up marrying a man named Samuel Moore. And they were basically considered some of the first settlers in the area, and they operate a grocery store. So they're not only are they one of the first settlers, but they're one of the first merchants as well. Prior to their grocery store, settlers would have had to go to York, Cooksville, Brampton, etc. And so having the establishment of their grocery there was obviously a really big thing for the community, and probably very much in a way like a watering hole in the community, and makes that become basically a commercial hub. Right. If that makes sense. They were staunch Presbyterians and attended the church that was adjacent to their property. And fast forward to 1839, Eliza Bell, who is the wife of the Reverend Andrew Bell, she passes away, and prior to this there is no graveyard that has been established. So Samuel Moore and his wife, they decide to donate part of their property that's basically right beside the church to become a graveyard. And so that graveyard is has a whole bunch of the Moore family members, but also a whole bunch of people from the community, especially, I should say, as well as Elizabeth Bell, and some, prominent people in the area. And so the cemetery is later referred to as Moore Cemetery in their honor. So that's where that name comes from, which is very interesting. And then as well, we have the Reverend, who I mentioned. So he was born in London, England, 1803, and he actually immigrated to Upper Canada in 1817, but actually left again to Glasgow to attend school at the University of Glasgow, and also the Scotland's Divinity School. And so he very much found a calling in the church. And so he returned and became a Presbyterian minister, actually originally in Streetsville. And then in 1830, he began preaching in Malton. And so prior to this, the services that would have been in the area prior to his arrival would have been held at different people's houses. So it was probably very much a godsend, if you will, that he came and became their first reverend there. So there was a log cabin that was actually established for services in 1833, and it became known afterwards as Bell's Church or Bell's Free Church after Reverend Bell. His first wife passed away only a few weeks after they were married. And so after that, he married Eliza Ann Thompson, Eliza Bell, as I was mentioning earlier. And so she was the daughter of the influential Lieutenant Colonel Edward Thompson. But then she unfortunately also passed away at a very young age, actually. She was only 23 years old.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot of very sad stories, unfortunately, and people who died quite young. So anyways, so like I was saying earlier, it was more or less her death kind of precipitated building the cemetery, or making the cemetery, I should say.
Right.
And I mean, and Reverend Bell also was the one that precipitated the church being built. So that's kind of interesting that both of the Bells, in a way, we kind of thank for that. I mean, as well,
it could be called Bell's Cemetery.
Yes, exactly. But then in the 1840s, he began kind of like co-preaching, if that makes sense. So he was preaching, I don't know if that makes any sense, but he was preaching in the Ancaster Dundas area,
right,
as well as in our area in Malton. And the same year as the crime, 1847, he ends up permanently moving and going to preach at Ancaster Dundas congregation.
Right.
So obviously we don't know exactly why he went, but there's some kind of play with that. That was kind of interesting. But that is true. He did actually move that same year. However, when he passed away in 1856, he actually ended up being still buried in Moors. The cemetery, the congregation he had helped found.
Right.
So that's very interesting. And so he's right there alongside Eliza.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have the story, I mean, the story of Eliza and like you said, many others in the cemetery really talk about that kind of low life expectancy and the stories of, all stories of loss are heartbreaking, but ones that are particularly young. And Moors has more than a few of them that life ends very, very at a young age, and that really is kind of emblematic, if you will, of our historic settlement era cemeteries. There's several around the city, and a lot of them tell about that struggle for life in the very early years. And so here you have Reverend Bell, who is a learned individual, literate, obviously, minister, who loses two spouses at young ages, right? So you talk about the impact on not only community but on individual families and the like. And like I said, Reverend Bell, wherever he went, we don't think of people who travel, but he came from London to Canada, went back overseas to school, comes back again. Yeah. So maybe going to Ancaster wasn't so far. So who next do we have?
So I wanted to kind of riff off of what you were just saying, because I think you bring up a really good point about in a way these sad stories of people dying so young. So the next person I want to talk about was John Lundy, and so he's also buried there. He's born in Ireland in 1811. He immigrates to Toronto Township and marries Anne Hamilton in 1841. So together the two have 5 children, and they're registered as being born in Chincoosy. And so there's Sarah, there's William, there's Martha, there's 2 Elizabeths actually, because the first Elizabeth Lundy, she is an infant when she passes away. So 1847, the same year as the story, she passes away. And so then the next year they have another daughter, and they also name her Elizabeth. But in 1849, John Lundy and 3 of his 4 remaining children all die within the space of 2 months. In August and September of 1849. The only people that survived was the mother and the eldest daughter, which was Sarah Jane Lundy. And so the mother, Anne Hamilton, went on to remarry George Lyons in 1853, and then lived in Chincoosy the rest of her life. But I mean, it's quite sad when you go and you see that not only are these people dying so young, but there's so many family members to all die in the same year, in the same month, in the same span of 2 months. Like that is, very telling in a way, and quite sad. And
again, devastating for family units, but also, this is not a big community at that time. And so, John Lundy was likely known by everyone. And like I said, he had young children. He was not that old himself, and this is kind of the you'd assume. I don't have it in front of me, and I'm not sure if we found death certificates at all, but you'd assume with that much loss in a single family in a short period of time, it's through an epidemic of some sort, whether it be diphtheria or cholera or smallpox or whatever it might be. But that was a fact of life. Medical attention was not necessarily right at hand, and not necessarily helpful as we rely on it today. And so here we are. COVID 2021 is a virtual event because of the ongoing pandemic, and we're touching on in general terms, I guess, other epidemics that have claimed lives here in Historic Mississauga. So yeah, quite a telling one. And again, each of these individuals lived at the time of our story, where 1847 is our story. 2 years later, 1849, John Lundy has passed away. And again, I know that's not the only story where we have individuals who passed shortly after our story took place. So who else do we have after John Lundy?
So I want to chat about another one of the women in our cast, our little cast of misfits here. So
we're referring to the actors, not the actual people.
Sorry. Yes. So sorry. So we have Helen Nicole McCrraw. And so she's born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1831. She marries John McCrraw, and they have one son named David. And in 1851, and John dies the next year, 1852. So the couple only had this one child together. And so you kind of think, because men are so often talked about in history, but what happens to the women after? And so in the 1871 census, we find her again, and she is listed as the head of the household and a widow. And she is living with her son David and his wife and their family in St. David's ward of Toronto. And so I thought that was just really interesting how she's listed as the head of the household, not David, her. And she presumably lived with them there until her death in 1909, and so but then she comes back to be buried in Moors. Well,
she's alive for more than 50 years as a widow, doesn't remarry, and is buried alongside her husband in Moors. And there is a story there. Certainly, there's over 50 years of life that continues past her marriage, and those are some of the curiosities. We always invite people who might be listening to this program or checking out the event. If you have information on individuals that we haven't captured, or perhaps we didn't share, but more particularly, if you have photographs. Almost none of the individuals that we're highlighting in Haunted Mississauga this year, we have photographs for. Only I think at least one we have, but and so we're always looking for that. So even though Haunted Mississauga is a program, and I was again. You're getting education without knowing you're having one. There's entertainment, of course, involved with this. It also represents an ongoing search for information, for stories, for pictures through Heritage Mississauga. So we look forward to kind of sharing what we've put together with you, but also hopefully generating some interest that shares back with us.
Yes, we're always learning as well.
Absolutely. So with that, I think we will leave the carrot dangling a bit, and we'll say tune in tomorrow as we share with you Haunted Mississauga 2021 of what we've created this year for our virtual event, and this is our 20th annual Haunted Mississauga. And here's hoping in 2022 we will be back in person at a cemetery near you. So again, Justine, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for spending some time with us here at Ask a Historian. Please like and subscribe and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. Also, keep sending in your questions, and each and every week we'll explore different stories around the City of Mississauga's history together. We want to thank the Ontario Trillium Foundation Resilient Communities Fund for their support that allows us to reimagine and present programs like Haunted Mississauga to better connect with our community. And again, join us tomorrow evening for the 20th annual Haunted Mississauga, taking place October 29th, a virtual program this year through Heritage Mississauga. And we'll leave the final word this week to one of our actors from Haunted Mississauga, Greg Carrero, portraying Edward Thompson in our story around the 1847 trial of James Hamilton, and our focus on Moores Cemetery for Haunted Mississauga 2021.
Oh, well, good evening. I'm sure you know who I am. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Edward William Thompson, and I'm going to be your host when Heritage Mississauga has an evening of murder. I'll guide you through the evening as we meet some of the locals, all of whom have a little bit of information that may or may not lead us to the murderer. Who knows? It could be you.